would like to introduce some technical details. So, I would like to encourage our viewers to post the comments under the live, so we have a chance as well to collect those and respond them during our discussion. The topic of minimum wages has been around in the Parliament for some time, including here in this place. Recently, the Parliament adopted the rules, new rules on the protection of the minimum wages. So I would like to ask you, Ms. Jongerius, let's cast more light as well on the basic concept. What is the adequate minimum wage, why we need it, and why we need the specific new rules? If you can respond to that.
I think an adequate minimum wage differs from one member state to the other, because we know that, of course, in Europe, the purchasing power in the different member states varies. The prices varies, but we see that in all member states, people having problems in paying their rents, their groceries, and their energy bills. So it's clear that especially those people who worked so hard for us during the COVID times, we call them the essential workers, or those we cannot miss on the labor market, are sometimes also the ones who go home with the most little paycheck. Mm-hmm. And this directive says we want each member state to do two things. We want them to check whether or not you can have a decent life from your minimum wage. So is the minimum wage adequate? Is it adequate when you look at a certain basket of goods and services? Is it adequate compared to other wages in the member states? And if not adequate, and we think that in 23 of the 27 member states the minimum wage is not adequate, there's work to be done, and the minimum wage should be raised to an adequate level. The second thing is that this directive says for a country it's better if more people fall under the coverage of a collective agreement. And we ask the member states to push for a coverage rate of 80% of the workers under a collective agreement, and if not, make a plan how to come there.
I see. And creating these living and working conditions equal is still a challenge in many member states, given the current context as well, with energy crisis and rising prices. Mr. Radtke, how these new rules would be reflected in, or how this can improve the living conditions of workers?
Well, it's improving the living condition in two different ways. On the one hand, we have the member states where we have a statutory minimum wage. There we have, as Agnes has mentioned now, new rules, new criteria, which have to be included into the debate on the question, what is a fair and adequate minimum wage? And as Agnes described, in many countries we have difficulties that people can spend the money that is needed for funding the daily life and daily things. We are not talking about luxury things, we are talking about daily life. So this criteria will help. For instance, it is of course the question of purchasing power will be included. So this is directly linked to the question of the costs of daily life. And on the other hand, this is only one part of the directive, because we do not have statutory minimum wages all over Europe, and we do not want to force anyone into statutory minimum wages. And the other key issue is, of course, the question of increasing the coverage of the collective agreements. So we have two ways where we improve that situation for the workers in the European Union is getting better and better within the next years.
Mm-hmm. I see you mentioned as well that the times are very difficult. And as well, I could take one comment from Facebook, from Fenrir, who says that really the minimum wage is basically consumed by inflation. So this as well adds to people's expectations, because from what people are commenting mainly is a little bit of a confusion in between in the concept that the adequate minimum wages on the European level would mean that the countries would sort of introduce an equal minimum wages everywhere. For example, there are a lot of differences. If you look at the numbers, the minimum wages in Bulgaria is 330 euros, and on the other hand, in Luxembourg, 2,000. So people expect naturally that this new rules as well would tackle that. What would you tell them? Why this is not possible?
To have the same numbers all over Europe. Well, of course, it is of course a question of what is economically possible, and of course the economic possibilities in Luxembourg, in Germany, in Austria, in the Netherlands, you cannot compare with Romania and Bulgaria. So we have different starting points where we are coming from. But the most important thing is that we can ensure that through the work of these criteria and that through the aim of 80% of collective agreements coverage, we have progress everywhere. And that is, I think, the most important thing. No one promised to have the same minimum wages in Bulgaria like in the Netherlands or in Germany. This would be crazy to give a promise like that. That is a lie. But to ensure progress everywhere, that is what we promised, and I think that is what we delivered.
Mm-hmm. And we are like in this criteria saying you should be able to lead a decent life. It's not a luxury life, as Dennis told, but a decent life. You have to be able to pay your bills, send your kids to school, afford healthcare, insurance, etc. So I think if we are able to make this basket of goods and services, it's hopefully in Bulgaria also cheaper than in Luxembourg. But you should be able to buy this basket of goods and services from your wage. This is one criterion. The second, we want that in every member state, the minimum wage is following suit to what the average wages are doing, and that's also an important message. And with these two promises, a basket of goods and a good relationship with the average wage, we can push for a better life for very much workers in Europe, and that will not lead to one minimum wage all over Europe. I think not in my lifetime we're going to see that, but we want progress everywhere, and we want all workers in Europe, whether they live in Bulgaria, Luxembourg, in Lithuania, or in the Netherlands, they should all be able to lead a decent life with a minimum wage.
I see. Now we have some comments of appreciation. Varanka Zoltán, I suppose from Hungary, is welcoming the introduction of European minimum wage. So that's one of the comments from our audience.
That is good to hear.
Great.
Please go on this way.
Especially from Hungary.
Yeah. As they abstained.
In council. In council.
Okay. So when talking about the member states, now member states, they have 2 years period to comply with the rules. What would be your message to step up this process, or how to really convince them?
A transposition period is always used in European legislation because you want member states to be able to adjust their legislation to the new European rules. But as you have mentioned before, all over Europe we see unprecedented inflation figures. For instance, in my country, the inflation is the highest since the Second World War. So this is really exceptional. And I would hope that member states will not wait the full 2 years before implementing this directive. They can start now, because now, at this moment, people have problems in making all ends meet. So, although I cannot force them, I can happily invite them, warmly recommend that they go quickly on transposing this, because people need money in their pockets.
Mm-hmm.
And who can say no with such advisor?
And great. So as there are some more information, we could as well send the greetings to people from Malta, Portugal, even Bangladesh, Hungary, Moldova, and Denmark who are watching this live at the moment. We could touch upon as well the equal pay, as there is a gap between the men and the women, because frankly, the figures say that 60% of minimum wage earners are women. So legislation can help close this gap. Is there as well some instruments or tools in this legislation which could close this gap?
It's clear that if you look, you mentioned the numbers, who are earning minimum wages all over Europe. Mm-hmm. It's the same sectors everywhere, so it's the cleaning sector, it's the agricultural workers, hospitality, but also retail. And if member states are now adjusting the minimum wage to a higher level, it's indeed women who profit from that. Mm-hmm. Although, of course, I do hope that men also can live a decent life from their minimum wages. And the directive itself is not aiming especially on equal treatment, but because there are more women working in these low-paid jobs, they will profit more, and I think it's high time that they profit more.
Okay. And if I may add this, I think to ensure that we have more collective agreements or more coverage of collective agreements will help also, because I have worked for a trade union as Agnes did, and the two of us, we negotiated the collective agreements, and there are no collective agreements for men and for women. So I think to ensure that we have higher numbers will also help in closing that gap. But especially for the situation, we came up with the legislation on the pay transparency. So there is some special action, some concrete action to ensure that we get rid of that gap.
Mm-hmm. And Oliver from Facebook is asking if the minimum wage is not the same across Europe, even in other European currency, it means that there is no minimum wage. So this is as well one of those comments I was saying we collect a lot. But you mentioned already the statutory minimum wage and the collective bargaining. Yeah. So these are basically two methods already present in member states. How the legislation will go about this? Will it try to unify, or will it keep as well these differences in member states?
No, of course we have different systems and different traditions, and of course this was clear from the very beginning of the negotiations, also between the two of us, that we do not want to spoil national traditions and national systems. That was one fear always repeated from Sweden, from Denmark. Oh, you are spoiling our system, and I can say no, we are not. So there are these traditions, but to combine it with criteria and with rules and with the political aim to have 80% coverage, you are not harming running and well-functioning systems. We are strengthening systems where it is not working in the systems where it is not working in the correct way. That is helping, but where everything is working well, we do not spoil it. But I want to come back to the argument. So if we do not have the same minimum wage all over Europe, there is no minimum wage. Sorry to say, but this is bollocks, because the rental of an apartment in Bulgaria is of course something different than the rental of the apartment in Munich, in Berlin, in Amsterdam or in Paris. You cannot say we do not have access to fair payment, to fair minimum wages if we do not have the same number, because we do not have the same prices.
Okay. Ms. Jongerius, could you explain us what the European Parliament has achieved in concrete measures stemming from this directive?
I think two things mainly, and that's one, that member states should check the adequacy. Can you lead a decent life in Bulgaria from this minimum wage? And if not, adjust the pay. And we know, because there are international standards. For instance, the Organization of Economic Cooperation in Europe has this standard where they measure the adequacy of minimum wage. If you look at this figure, for 23 of the 27 member states, the minimum wage is too low. And this was even before this skyrocketing inflation figures. So testing the adequacy and work on the adequacy of the minimum wages it's about real money. And the other thing, pushing for more people under the coverage of a collective agreement is also, in my opinion, and I don't say this because Dennis and I, we are former trade union negotiators, but because I'm deeply convinced that people with a collective agreement have more fair and decent pay. And in this directive, we also made clear that trade unions should be welcome in a company, should be able to organize the people. We should indeed also make it clear that collective bargaining is something to strive for instead of just a nuisance, which it has been treated before in the banking crisis. We are changing the tone, we are changing the recipe book for economic policies from Europe, and we're putting, I think, a well-deserved spotlight on those workers we tend to forget, but from which it was clear during the COVID crisis that if they would not have cleaned the hospitals, if they would not have distributed the parcels, if they had not cooked our food or nursed people when they're ill, the society was really in problem. So there were a lot of people who just were able to sit behind their laptop and do their online meetings. But those people really did important work. And I think it's now time that they get a pay rise.
Okay. This might be as well coming again with the digital transition. Many jobs will undergo changes, and very likely artificial intelligence as well will also step in. How can this affect the social rights and conditions of employees in the future? If you look a little bit in the future, will as well this be affecting the conditions?
I don't think this directive per se is covering this, but at other legislation, for instance, the legislation for so-called platform workers, so let's say the drivers of Uber or the food deliveries who are biking in all the major cities in Europe, they are now often denied their worker status. So the platform is saying these are not workers, these are self-employed, and therefore they don't need to guarantee a minimum wage, they don't need to guarantee social benefits. But luckily we are working on legislation in this field. I think it's very necessary because indeed artificial intelligence, computer systems, digital revolution will touch upon a lot of jobs, and we need to be prepared. Dennis is also working on this legislation.
Yeah, we are talking about more than 5 million people in the European Union working in their platforms. And of course, there are people who are self-employed and are originally self-employed, and we do not want to force them into labor contracts, but you have a lot of people, as Agnes described, who are denied in getting access to minimum wages, to social security, and that is not acceptable. This has nothing to do with self-employment, this is bogus self-employment, and this is robbery of public money, because in the very end, the solidarity, we all together have to take responsibility for the people who are falling through the net because they do not have access to social security, and that has to stop, and that is why we are taking concrete action on this.
Then we have a question from the other side, from the side of the businesses. How the member states can implement the directive in a way that it wouldn't curb their competitiveness or the competitiveness of the businesses, of the companies? What would be the...
Here I think we should make a little difference between, let's say, the butcher with two people working for him, or let's say the hairdresser with one woman working for her. And the big companies, because we know that quite a numerous amount of people are working for big cleaning companies, for big distribution, for big nursing employment, and I think those companies have earned a very big amount of money during the COVID time. So I think I don't feel sorry for these large multinational companies who are trying to keep people in the low payment. I think we should at member state level see how we can help the small and medium-sized companies to also pay a fair wage, while on the other hand it's also clear that if people have more money in their pockets, they're also being able to buy this bread of the baker, go to the hairdressers, go to the butcher. So it's also economically sound to raise the wages, because then people have more to pay.
And I'd like to add, the implementation of the directive, this is not up to the companies, this is up to the member states, because this directive is an issue for the member states and not in the first step for the companies. And you do not have to forget, or you have to keep in mind, that the question of national long-term productivity is one of the criteria we introduced now into the question of raising the minimum wages. And so if the increase of the minimum wage does fit with national productivity, long-term productivity, there cannot be a problem.
Okay, and a very last question, as our time is running out. I would like to ask you, because this type of rules are part of the European social pillar, what we can expect still in the future, as well from the European Parliament, in improving the social conditions of people, of citizens?
No, the first one has already been touched upon, the platform directive. I do hope that we also will be able to take some measures on the issue of occupational health and safety. You see that also clear during the COVID crisis, a lot of mental problems arose. So protecting people's health and make everyone being able to be at work and still stay healthy will be a topic, and perhaps we could also, from the European Parliament, push for, let's say, not only measures on the, let's say, electricity market, energy market, but also how to compensate people who really have problems in paying their bills.
And I think there We are working now on a care strategy, European care strategy, that was also an initiative from the Parliament. The Commission took it over. We worked on the INI on mental health. I'm not sure what the Commission is going to deliver there, but you have several things which are ongoing, and implementing the social pillar into national right, into European right, into European law. This is an ongoing process, and hopefully it will not stop with this term of the Parliament.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and being here in the discussion. And I would like to thank you, viewers, as well, for watching our lives. And of course, stay tuned for the future upcoming activities which we are planning in the coming weeks and months. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yeah.